Last week, we pinpointed where you are on your relationship grid. Now we're taking it a step further. If you've ever wondered how to break free from those old sort of automatic patterns that keep tripping you up, today's episode is for you. We're going to explore exactly what it takes to interrupt those habits and, even more importantly, how to replace them with the behaviors that support real connection, strength, resilience in your relationship. That's what's next up here on Master Your Marriage. Welcome back to another episode of Master Your Marriage.
I am pretty excited about this episode. So actually over the last, I would say 3 months, actually.
3 months.
Yeah,
okay.
we've introduced a lot of different lenses or ways to be able to help you to see yourself more honestly, to see your relationship more clearly.
Yeah.
You know, first we went through 8 different episodes talking about losing strategies.
Yeah. I remember that.
Do you remember that? We talked about behaviors like needing to be right. We talked about control. We talked about unbridled self-expression. We talked about retaliation, defensiveness, withdrawal, resentful accommodation. Remember all those?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, why would we do that? Why did we spend 2 months examining these different losing strategies? And what we hope that you took away from that, if you followed along and you engaged with those journaling questions, we hope that these episodes have been really eye-opening in understanding yourself, your patterns, and especially your adaptive child.
So let's backtrack and talk about what this adaptive child is again.
Yeah,
right?
please.
The adaptive child is a part of us that has learned certain coping strategies it needed to survive, but it operates from a me-centric perspective rather than an us or a we perspective.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, our adaptive child really has little interest in connection, compromise, or finding a win-win. And when this part of you takes over, it's not about you and me. It's all about me.
Right. This is what we refer to as the 5-year-old driving the bus.
Yeah. Or the 3-year-old, 5-year-old driving the bus. It's me.
Right.
Yeah.
So we also spent 4 weeks discussing Terry Real's relationship grid, which showed you how to map your reactive behaviors into one of 4 quadrants. So why did we do that? Well, because by identifying your quadrant, you gained yet another lens to be able to see your adaptive child and recognize what its agenda is when you're getting triggered or kind of knocked off course. So it's all been a way for you to kind of just gently but firmly put your arm around your adaptive child and say, you know, I see you.
Come here, little buddy.
Yeah, I understand you, but you need to kind of slide out of the way and let me drive this bus.
Let the grown-ups drive the bus today.
Yes.
All these tools we've shared offer different ways for you to see yourself more clearly. So you can ask the crucial questions. Who am I in my relationship problems? Like, how do I play a part here? And what kind of person am I to live with?
That's a big question.
Yeah, those are hard questions. Not a lot of us want to ask those questions.
So hopefully through these episodes, you become more aware, okay, of your dysfunctional relationship strategies. And honest to goodness, like no judgment from us whatsoever, because we know that we all have these dysfunctional patterns.
Oh, yeah.
We all utilize losing strategies. We've done them. We do better and they show up less in our relationship, but we all have them. Maybe as you've listened to these episodes, you've discovered, like I did in the past, that when your adaptive child is in charge, you tend to act one up and boundaryless. If you remember that from last week, right?
Yeah.
That's where we're regressing to losing strategies like, I need to be right. I'm entitled. I'm angry. I need to be in control. And maybe if I don't get what I want, I'm going to retaliate or punish you.
Yeah. I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
Felt that. I was really good at that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's all just part of learning. And as we mentioned earlier, just sort of shining light on the situation.
Shining a flashlight.
Yeah. And that's the hard part. I bet you're sort of beginning to recognize some of these patterns in yourself, like locating yourself on the, on that quadrant, right? That you hadn't paid much attention to how they showed up or how you showed up in your relationship.
Because they were just on autopilot. So when we let our adaptive child take charge and we regress to using these losing strategies, we're being indulgent we're indulging in these losing strategies. We're spending energy on behavior that doesn't actually get us what we truly want, doesn't get us the relationship that we want. And actually what we're really doing is we're using another person to manage our anxiety, to manage our stress, but we're using someone else to be able to do that.
Or we're forcing them to help us manage it.
Yeah, rather than handling it ourselves.
Yeah.
We're dropping our adaptive child at our partner's feet and say, you deal with it.
Kicking and screaming.
And that kind of indulgent behavior is not going to work.
No.
Real growth and real maturity comes when we are radically honest with ourselves and we stop doing these behaviors that are hindering us, even if we're not sure with how to actually replace them or what to replace them with.
Yeah.
I kind of think of it like energy, right? By redirecting the energy that you maybe, for example, you might have used for retaliation or defensiveness. Instead, you redirect that energy to a different part of your brain to come up with wise alternatives. Let's strengthen that muscle and let's come up with some wise options, some other alternatives.
So even if you have no idea what to do, just stop doing the old thing, the thing that's not serving you. This will allow you to keep your energy focused in your prefrontal cortex, where planning and problem solving take place. And when you're using your prefrontal cortex, you're developing the capacity for mature decisions, which then will lead to lasting love and a much better relationship.
So takeaway there is, if we backtrack, let's just, even if we don't know what to do, just stop doing the old thing and exercise that muscle of the prefrontal cortex. And you'll be surprised with what you'll actually come up with.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to exercise your ability to problem solve.
Exactly.
Instead of prefrontal cortex is problem solving, right? And then the sort of the lizard brain is the reaction, childish behavior that we had before.
Yeah. So now there's another reason to stop your losing strategy. And I like to think of this as stopping your half of this dysfunctional dance.
I like that.
That you and your partner do together as a couple.
Because takes two to tango.
As a dance, right?
Yeah.
And all couples, whether they realize it or not, they develop these sort of unspoken collusive patterns with each other. We talked about one example of this last week, I think it was, where we talked about how sometimes a one-up person will go and find a one-down person, marry that person because the one-up person desperately wants someone to blame.
Right. And the one-down person is happy to take the blame because they just
exactly. Because they're like, hey, it's me. I'm always the problem.
Yeah, I'm always the problem. It's me. I know.
Yeah.
Taylor Swift song.
And it's not always a one-up and one-down pattern that seem to marry each other. You know, the saying is that we tend to marry our unfinished business.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I think we pick out someone that is familiar, maybe from our childhood, at least that's the theory, maybe familiar, but a little bit better because our unconscious brain is always trying to reconcile. So it wants to solve these past hurts and traumas. And so whatever it is, we get into a relationship where we create a certain equilibrium with our partner, a certain dance, a certain collusion, but it's destructive, or it can be destructive.
Can be, yeah.
But here's the thing. When you stop dancing, when you stop playing your part, you disrupt a pattern that desperately needs to be broken.
Yeah.
It needs to be broken.
Yeah. And your partner is all of a sudden just left alone, right?
On
so
the
if you
dance
stop
floor.
dancing, understandably, your spouse is like, whoa, what just happened? I thought we were dancing here.
Yes.
Right. And so their dance partner just sat down and they're standing in the middle of the dance floor by themselves trying to figure out, should I just keep doing this thing that I've been doing or not? And they might try dancing a little harder to get you back to join them, right? You can almost guarantee that they're going to try to get you to come back because the pattern is one that has been so ingrained, right? It's it's normal. They're like, oh no, this is the thing that we do. This is our thing. You're supposed to join me on our thing,
right?
Even if it's a destructive thing, right? So when you stop dancing, when you stop playing your part with your partner, realize your partner is probably going to try to pull you back into that because this is what we do. This is our thing.
Because
I don't understand why you're changing it. It's familiar and it's also safe because I already know what the outcome is. If I'm one up, I know you're going to say it's my fault and then I am happy. And then if I'm one down, I'm happy that you told me that it's my fault because it helps feed my worthlessness. Yeah.
I think the idea that, we do the familiar, even if it's not necessarily good for us, it reminds me of a story that I heard. And I think it was a zoo, like the San Francisco Zoo, I think it was, where they wanted to make it more humane and more, sort of naturalistic. And they looked at the animals that were in these small cages and said, we need to give them more space. So let's tear down these cages. Let's tear down these walls. Let's give them more space. And specifically, I think they were talking about like the elephant area, and they took down the walls. And you know what the elephants did? Even after they had all this space to go and roam, guess what they did?
They stayed put.
They did. They stayed in this tiny little area, even though the walls were removed.
They're conditioned to that space.
Right. It's kind of similar, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. This is a perfect analogy for human nature. We're often so afraid of like the unknown and what's outside of our boundary that we'd rather stay in this reality, whether or not it's painful, than take a chance on something that we don't understand, that we don't know, and that honestly we don't know how it's going to go for us.
But the truth is, as we've heard before, if nothing changes, nothing changes.
Nothing changes, nothing
right?
changes. Yeah, absolutely.
Just like the elephants, we can't just become comfortable in the familiar so much so that we miss out on something that's infinitely better.
I love the infinitely better. Like that's the part that we need to look at.
Yeah.
It could be infinitely better.
Right. So I know that you came here today looking for more than just like, hey, you have all the answers inside of you. You've got this, right? Last week, we did promise to give you practical tips for each of the relationship quadrants. So let's do that. Let's get to that. So where you find yourself on that quadrant that we described last week is going to guide you to where to go next and what specific healing work you actually personally need to do.
Right. And so the first tip really is that we've emphasized, I don't know, about 1 million times, right?
Every episode.
Yeah. So it's just self-confrontation. You can't change what you can't see, and you can't shift your behavior if you don't recognize how it's working against you, right? Self-confrontation is a masterful skill. It's the foundation of all of our other skills.
Yeah.
We have to be able to self-confront. And it starts with examining your own contribution to every single one of your relationship problems. It's never just their problem. It's always our problem.
Right. And self-confrontation, like you said, it's about looking at all of our relationship problems and what our role in is in it, but it's not doing it in a way that is from a place of self-shaming or putting yourself back into that one down position, which so many of us are doing anyway.
Right.
It's not like, oh yeah, you're right. I do that. I'm such a loser. It's just like I am worthless. Like it's not that. It's about getting clarity on your role in the pattern. And without that clarity, you stay blind to your own behaviors and you stay fragile. So no matter what quadrant you're in, the first step is self-confrontation.
Absolutely. So next, it's important to identify where you are in the quadrants because it will determine the work that you need to focus on. So let's go through each of the quadrants one by one. And if you don't remember that, or if you're just jumping onto this episode, our previous episode has a download and we talk about that. So pull that up so that at least when you look at it, you'll know kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah. I'll put the link in the show notes for this episode as well.
So we'll have it on this one as well.
So one up and boundaryless. We talked about
top right.
This is the top right quadrant. And if you're one up and boundaryless, you're like me. Okay. This has been what I've had to work on overcoming. So if you're one up and boundaryless, your main task is to develop a containing side of your boundary, which means you need a boundary. You need to strengthen your boundary, but it's in order to help hold yourself in check. So your boundary is to protect other people from you when you become psychologically intrusive. Your superiority, your grandiosity, when it's combined with that lack of a boundary, can be pretty offensive to other people, pretty demanding. So you'll need to rein that in and learn to contain yourself with a little bit more of a boundary.
Yeah. And a big part of this work is really building empathy and compassion. And you may lack empathy in this position, right? So start practicing empathy exercises. And we have an episode here on the podcast that can help you with that. You'll also need to understand the difference between a request and a demand. There's a big difference, and other people can feel your demandingness. And that is something you have to work on. And remember, people are unlikely to respond positively to your needs if your energy is controlling, demanding, or insulting.
Right.
That's that one up.
Yeah.
Boundaryless.
So if you as we all do, we want to get our needs met as much as possible. It's super important to frame those needs that we have. And there's nothing wrong with having needs and helping one another to get our needs met in a relationship.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
it's important to make sure you're framing those needs as a request,
Right.
not a demand. That's crucial. And again, we have 2 episodes back on this topic that you can go back to on how to ask for your needs to be met without coming across as demanding.
Yeah, or starting a
fight.
Yeah, starting a thing up, right? The key focus of this quadrant is building a boundary, particularly one that helps you contain yourself and at the same time respect other people's perspectives.
So this is the work we've had to do.
Yeah. And we talk about how, in this balancing act, you might have a 1 down marries a 1 up, or for some reason we both were 1 up. Which meant we're just the atoms colliding in the same quadrant nonstop.
Right. So Robert and I both 1 up, boundaryless most of the time. Yes, there were some things that were kind of context dependent where maybe we'd shift into, but I would say the majority of the time, this is the quadrant we would both go to. So for us, it was the same stuff. It was working on empathy, working on compassion, learning to frame things as a request, not a demand, learning to come across in a way that is compassionate
and kind,
and not demanding and not insulting.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So let's look at the next quadrant. The next quadrant down, number 2, is boundaryless and 1 down. So it's still, you're lacking a boundary, but it's in the 1 down position.
Right.
So when you're here, the core issue for you to work on is self-esteem. It means that if you're in this quadrant, you're a love addict or love dependent.
Love me, love me, love me.
Mm-hmm. Or the cold-blooded reptile that is the temperature of the rock that they're laying on. You often kind of associate this quadrant with the anxious attachment style because you tie your sense of worth to how other people perceive you. Right. And as long as they see you in a great light, then you feel secure. But the moment that they don't, then you end up crashing.
Yeah. And you might do anything to make sure that people will see you in a good light,
including being controlling, but more in a passive aggressive way.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some healing work here. And the goal really is to build your self-esteem. Mm-hmm. Remind yourself that all people have inherent worth. No one is above or below anyone else, and you don't need someone else's validation to confirm your value. This is a given. It's inherent. So your primary focus is developing a protective boundary. Boundaries that have 2 sides, containment and protection. While the 1-up person needs to focus on containment, you need to focus more on the protective side to shield yourself from the psychological influence of others, i.e. their opinions of you.
Correct. And if you remember a couple episodes ago, we did a meditation on this, on how to grow a boundary, essentially.
Yeah.
This was our episode on shame, I believe, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Or no, sorry, boundaries, actually.
Yeah.
So that would be really great for you, actually, if you're in this quadrant, to go back and listen to that meditation. Maybe use it all the time for a while.
Yeah.
Go back and use it on a regular basis. If I were working with you in this quadrant and you were in this quadrant, we were working one-on-one, we would also dive into some belief work and some parts work to help you to develop a stronger sense of self, a healthy self-esteem that isn't dependent on other people.
Yeah. Another essential skill for you to learn is saying no to things that conflict with your needs, because you're likely over accommodating others, saying yes when you shouldn't. And that's sort of fueling this resentment towards your spouse, right? Check out our episode on how to say no without starting a fight. This, you will find, is an invaluable tool for setting a protective boundary.
Yeah. And we call this resentful accommodation, right?
Yeah.
These are the people pleasers that go around overly accommodating people at the cost of their own needs and then resenting them for it.
Yeah. And at the cost of their own schedule and their health at times. Yeah.
Yes. So now let's go over to the walled off side of the grid, which would be over here.
Left side bottom.
And this is, again, walled off and 1 down.
Yeah. And so you may feel resigned if you're this walled off 1 down, right? And in this, like, why bother?
Why bother?
Right? Last week we sort of made an analogy to Eeyore for the people that represent this quadrant, right? It's also connected to this avoidant, dismissive attachment style. Deep down, you wall yourself off from others because you don't feel worthy of love from anyone else.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't deserve your care, your love, your attention.
Depression and resignation are rampant in this quadrant. And if this quadrant starts to resonate with you, then it's time to re-engage. It's time to take a risk. Even if you don't believe that you're worthy of it or you deserve it, even if you don't believe that it will work. It's
Yeah.
time to muster up some courage and try, despite all the fear and skepticism and the resignation that are kind of running around in your head. Push yourself to step out from behind that wall and re-engage in your relationship and your marriage. I know it's scary because you worry that you'll be overpowered by your spouse, but you can develop a more supple boundary that will protect you without sort of feeling this need to be completely walled off.
Well, that's the thing, right? Because people that go here and wall off on both up and down, right, in the one up and down position, they go there because they feel like they're going to be obliterated by the other person. They're going to be overpowered by the other person.
Right.
So I get that it's scary. And if we were working together in sessions, we would, again, because it's the one down position, we would work on self-esteem again here.
Inherent value.
And facing those fears of letting the wall down.
Yeah.
That would be the other piece. And, you know, you could do some things on your own. You could do some work identifying, for example, your needs and actually feeling worthy to have needs. And remember that you are of inherent value and you are worthy to advocate for those needs that you have in your relationship. So learning to speak and voice your needs in a way that is constructive and compassionate is really helpful way for you to start stepping out of this quadrant and reconnecting with your partner.
Yeah, this is the my needs and wants don't matter category.
Because I'm not worthy
because
of
I'm
my
not
needs.
worthy. Yeah. Okay, so finally we come to the last quadrant, the one up and walled off. And if you're watching on YouTube, then it'll be, I'm just kind of drawing a circle, but it will be top left side of this quadrant. This is the who needs you anyway quadrant, right? Where there's a sense of superiority that says like, hey, I'm fine on my own. I don't need anybody, right? And if this resonates with you, if you recognize yourself, it's time to step down off your high horse, right? Grandiosity may feel good, but and believe me, I know. But it's really destructive and corrosive in your relationship. Yeah. And this is any relationship with the people around you, but most importantly in that relationship with your partner or in your marriage. So you're not better than anyone else, and acting like you are won't really serve your relationships in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think people that are in this quadrant, I think it's also good to think about, you know, those that are around you that are mapping your kids, for example. They're observing, they're learning everything. They're mapping your behavior and watching how you relate to one another. They're learning relational skills. And so you probably don't want to pass these patterns down to your kids. So again, let that wall down, bring that grandiosity back to a neutral level.
Dial it back a little bit. Let's dial it back to center.
No better than, no less than, same as. And beneath the wall, remember, like we just said, there's a fear. There's a fear of getting too close. If I get too close, I'm going to be overpowered, obliterated, lost in this relationship. And that's a lie. The truth is that healthy boundaries are possible. And when they're healthy, they allow for real connection without losing yourself, without feeling like you're being overpowered. It's about creating a healthy boundary that still protects you, but allows you to accept someone into your life and accept what is true into your life. So letting down your wall doesn't mean sacrificing all protection. It means gaining the ability to choose what gets through the boundary and what doesn't get through the boundary. So for you, if you're in this walled off one up position, you're going to want to also work on identifying your needs and really learning how to ask for them in your relationship in a constructive way. So for you, it's really going to be about learning to negotiate those needs with your partner and then being able to tolerate it when your partner is like, yeah, I can't do that right now. So when you don't get exactly what you want, are you going to be able to handle that and tolerate that?
That's when the 3-year-old wants to show up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's hard, right? So here's the bottom line. If you're in the one up position, it's time to come down. If you're in the one down position, you need to move up. And if your boundaries are too porous, work on strengthening them and reinforcing them or containing them. And if you're too walled off, it's time to open up and engage. Wherever you find yourself, don't panic. These are simply coping strategies that your adaptive child has developed as a way to survive. And there's a great quote that says, don't meet harshness with harshness. There's nothing that harshness does that loving firmness can't do better. This doesn't just apply to how you treat others. It's also true for how you treat your adaptive child. Wherever you are, take a breath gently, lead that part of yourself back to the center with a loving but firm hand.
Yeah. Remember we showed you on the grid that health is in the middle.
Yeah.
right? Not too much or too little boundary, not too much or too little self-esteem, but right in the middle. So that's where we need to go, is to the middle of the grid. Remember, don't ever try to solve relationship issues from any of the outer parts of the quadrants, only from the middle. Only when you're grounded in center and connected with that wise adult self can you truly even utilize a relationship skill. We need to have the mature adult on board in order to do any of those things.
So like they're saying, can I speak to the adult in the room, please?
Right.
And what I want you to think about when we talk about this grid and we identify, these areas, remember that we said this is where the adaptive child likes to show up most, in the outside edges and the corners.
Yeah.
And when the wise adult shows up, it starts to draw us more into the center.
Yeah.
So it's not like we have to look for our way back to the center. If we look for our way back to, getting rid of what this child wants to do and how it wants to drive the bus, and put some prefrontal cortex, some pre-planning in the situation, and what would I do if I really cared about somebody, we'll all end up back towards the middle.
Yeah, I love that.
So this is a wrap for this episode, and also a wrap for this relationship grid for now. We hope it has empowered you with some new tools and ways of thinking about the patterns that tend to show up in your relationships.
When you get triggered.
When you get triggered. Yeah, absolutely.
We also have a new series that's going to be starting up next week.
We do.
Okay.
What's
I'm
that
excited about.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about essential skills for strong marriages.
Skill up, baby. Let's do it.
So rather than talking about all the losing strategies, we're going to start diving back into skills again. So
perfect.
Be sure to subscribe to the show so you get alerted when the next show drops. But before you go, if you found value in today's episode, if you wouldn't mind, please do us a favor and leave us a 5-star review and a comment. You would be surprised. Your feedback really does help us to reach more people and make a bigger impact in the world.
Absolutely. And if you know someone who would benefit from this episode, would you please just share the podcast with them?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It helps us to reach our mission to help more couples.
Yeah. So be kind to each other this week. Put each other first. Remember, it's the small things done often that make the biggest difference.